I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristen Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried, will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Hi, everyone. Kristen Walker here, and I'm here with Dr. and Reverend Stephanie Holmes. Hello. How are you, Stephanie?
Good morning. It's been a while, Kristen.
I know. We work together on doing shows on the Mental Health News Radio Network and, your respective field in the work of autism and the world of autism. Just so my listeners have an update on who you are and what you do, can you just tell everyone a little bit about your background?
Yes. So my journey into mental health really started as a practitioner several years ago, almost 25 years ago. I was a licensed professional counselor in the state of North Carolina, had my master's degree in counseling, bachelor's in psychology. I like to say I was just kind of minding my own business, kind of in private practice and doing my thing. Marriage and family was a passion of mine. I specifically feel called to faith-based persons because sometimes there's not a lot of good care there for people who are faith-based as well. And in the middle of that, my oldest daughter was beginning to have some issues in school and what they were calling behavior problems. And she was diagnosed with what was then called Asperger's in 2005-06. She's been reassessed and now with autism level 1, which is mostly what happens for an Asperger diagnosis. And that kind of launched my understanding of then more research in autism, because especially in 2005 and 6, there was not a lot of it on research on girls. So that kind of launched me into a new space. I work primarily with marriage and family where someone has autism or special needs, and we talk about the dynamics of that family system where autism or special needs is present.
And you do incredible work. And tell everyone the name of your podcast on the network.
So funny, that's part 2 of our story. So years later, after my daughter was diagnosed, I was so focused on autism in girls, I had missed that my own spouse was on the spectrum as well. So he was officially diagnosed in 2019, although we began to suspect that difference. And so we became what is now kind of being called a neurodiverse couple. And then because we are both reverends and Christians, a neurodiverse Christian couple. And so that is the name of our podcast, Neurodiverse Christian Couples. And we either talk to couples or professionals or kind of new research in the field of autism, focusing a little bit more on adults because we're talking about a marriage, usually a marriage relationship.
Right, exactly. Well, we've come together to talk about a specific topic that I'm going to have you share, which can certainly be considered a touchy subject, touchy even outside of the world of autism. It's a topic that I have done many, many shows about, and I can tell you listeners, my listeners will know exactly what I'm referencing, but watching what topics were the most listened to during the pandemic was really interesting because, everybody's at their most heightened, state in one way or another during that time. And I saw we have so many different topics across the network, everything from autism to borderline personality disorder to anxiety to trauma. I mean, everything you can imagine under the mental health umbrella is being talked about, but the same topic that was the most listened to before the pandemic was listened to, double, triple, quadruple the listens during the pandemic was about narcissistic personality disorder. I thought that was really interesting. What do you think, Stephanie?
Yeah, I was just at a conference last week and they were talking a little bit on the subject of narcissism. And they said that over these past 3 years, the rate of narcissism being officially diagnosed has about a 25% rise and increase just over
Yeah.
these couple of years. And so I thought that was interesting because it's kind of interesting when therapeutic words start coming out into the public anyway, right? So some
Yeah.
people just they call somebody who's really about themselves on Instagram, oh, they're narcissistic. Or you hear at Christmas time, I have Christmas OCD because I like she's
Right.
so she's bipolar. And sometimes we throw stuff around that's a clinical word that may or may not be to the level of a diagnostic criteria. But I did find it interesting that the presenter, who's also an expert in personality disorders, was saying of the personality disorders, that one's on the rise the most. And just seeing that much of a jump was surprising. We all have theories as to why that is, but there needs to be some more research as to why that is.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it made me think, and I know, you came to me about this too, but about people on the autism spectrum and how often they can be vilified for different things. And one of the, I think, misdiagnoses there, and you'll have to tell me if you see it still happen, is that someone who's on the spectrum is getting confused for someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. So I'd love to get into why that is, the myths, all of those things related to that happening.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. You and I did a show, gosh, several years ago now, and I think you kind of provocatively titled it like, narcissism or Asperger's, or something
Right.
like that. And it drew a lot of interest, and it drew a lot of negative comments, even from people on the spectrum, which let me know they did not listen to it
Right.
because, especially then, I've changed some of my thoughts on this, but especially then, I was advocating that you could not be both. I mean, I was
Right.
actually, because of my autism advocacy, was advocating for those on the spectrum, that because some traits look very similar, there's often a misdiagnosis, and made a very strong claim that I didn't think someone could be both on the spectrum and narcissistic personality disorder because of the concept of theory of mind. But since we've had that last discussion, I've done more research, I've gotten a doctorate, I've spoken to more people, and finding that you can have both. I think when we spoke last, my biggest concern was the differential, because many of the adults I was working with, if they went for a clinical evaluation, were getting diagnosed as narcissists instead of autism spectrum or then Asperger's. And that was concerning me because you certainly work with that person differently. And so I was at that point seeing that happen so much, like, let's do a show and let's talk to clinicians and spouses out there that, it's not the same thing, which is still true.
Right.
But now I think there can be a crossover, since autism is genetic. It's a genetic neurological wiring, and narcissism is a personality disorder, which if someone had trauma or maybe some family of origin stuff or life events, who's not to say there could be both in the same person?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I will say this, I have noticed there's always, negative backlash, anything that you put out on the internet, because anyone can, get their fingers on a keyboard and, not listen to something, take snippets of something or not understand it, and then write a horrible review. So I'm certainly used to that. I mean, I've done, I don't know how many thousands of shows at this point, but the fevered pitch at which that goes on today is so much more than it was in the 10 years that I've been doing podcasts, which I think is really interesting. So my hat's off to you, Stephanie. You're very brave for doing this show now.
Knowing it's going to have backlash. I know.
But it's such an important discussion. To have, because of course someone on the spectrum can have narcissistic traits, narcissistic even to the point of a personality disorder. There's nothing going on with autism that makes it impossible for someone to also be a narcissist.
Right. And like I said, but my heart of advocacy, especially at the time, maybe perhaps I was a little too black and white in my own thinking. But, when you think of theory of mind, because that's where I was doing a lot of my research. I think I may have even been starting some of my dissertation research at that time. But, theory of mind is that ability, and let's kind of talk about it for the narcissist first. So for a narcissist use of theory of mind, we say they have a high theory of mind, because to know how to manipulate and gaslight and make you feel crazy, you've got to kind of know a person, how to get under their skin, how to get into their mind, and then how to kind of get in and get out slyly. You've got to get in, make that comment, make them feel crazy, and then be like, what?
Right.
And then in autism, we talk more about some challenges in theory of mind, missing social cues, missing body cues, missing some of the reading between the lines. But I guess where I see it show up the most, if I'm working with a person on the spectrum who I'm also suspecting is on this narcissistic personality disorder possibility, or maybe has narcissistic traits, in like survival mode, can do some of that gaslighting stuff. Like when they're in that defense mode, maybe, you said, hey, I saw you did this. And like, no, I didn't. It tends to be more of like a
reactionary.
Yeah. And this is anecdotal. This is not research driven. This is my own private practice. I am seeing it when I have a person on the spectrum who is a doctor of some kind. If they're in the high prevalent doctor, research doctor, or in the academic field. There's been a lot, as I work in their family of origin stuff, there's been a lot of people telling them how smart they are, how superior they are. And that's why I'm kind of careful. Like, I want to encourage, all kids on the spectrum and teens on the spectrum and their identity. We got to be careful with this like autism gift and speaking superiority into that. So that's where, at least in the cases that I've had, I would say I've had a good 9 or 10 in the last year or two. And it really was, as we were looking over that, either the family system was like so non-supportive of their academia, you're not a sports star, you don't fit into our family, and that person like had to prove themselves, or there was like, you're so awesome. They were kind of the star of the family, the golden child of the family. One or both parents, their identity was on how smart, like, ooh, they went to MIT, Stanford, Harvard, that was, I think that played a part in that development of narcissistic traits.
Right. And there's, a difference. You can have narcissistic traits, but that does not mean that you have a full-blown personality disorder.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's where we have to remember that kind of spectrum that's out there. I mean, we're all capable of being selfish and self-absorbed, just being human beings. And I interviewed someone named Jody Carlton on my show, and she's a little bit more of a specialist in this crossover of narcissism. Actually, she's got a great practice is narcissism, autism, but also if there's a TBI or some kind of brain injury, she can even go to that kind of level. But
Right.
she was saying, because I was like, well, Jody, help me understand this. How can, high theory of mind and low theory of mind exist in the same person?
Right.
And you could hear a pin drop. She said, just look at the pandemic and all of a sudden people losing their mind over which side of the fence they're on masks or not masks, but vaccines, not vaccines, like highly theory of mind people who have become rigid on one way or the other. I'm not going to speculate as to that. And I was like, oh yeah, she's like, think about the political divide right now. You have high theory of mind in some areas of your life and kind of a lower in others when you're kind of trapped on something. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense because I tend to see it in my autistic clients who kind of really, again, get in that defense space. Maybe it's a space of vulnerability or maybe past shame or trauma, or again, that specialness that someone has kind of planted in their mind. And that's where I see that crossover. And now I'm going to say that's a very difficult client to work with. I'm going to say that's my most difficult client, is a crossover of spectrum and narcissism together. That's
Of
a
course.
highly difficult situation.
I'm surprised they even go to therapy, but maybe the autism is what pushes them to go, because most narcissists do not dust the chairs of a therapist's office with their behinds. They just don't.
Right. Well, it comes to usually when that person comes, they have agreed to come because we're going to change the wife. That's what their thought is. I'm here to tell you what my wife does and, to kind of humiliate her and, and let you know what a bad wife she is. And I essentially is to humiliate her. It's interesting because when I work with the wife or women, I mean, women tell me they'll stuff. They're open, like, yeah, I did this. I shouldn't have said it that way. I made this mistake, more kind of readily open to coaching. How do I communicate in a different way to my spouse on the spectrum? And then if someone's got that mix of autism and narcissism, they want to start their session on, it's all about the, like, well, did she tell you this? Did she know about that? Did she tell you this? Like, let me tell you all her secrets just in case she didn't, as a huge deflection. So the motive is not really pure to really be there to work on the relationship.
I thought it was interesting. There's a movie that had been redone by Will Ferrell and I can never remember her name, but she's a lovely actress from Seinfeld. Julie, anyway, I can't remember her name, but there's a remake of a movie that I think was Dutch or it was French, where this couple and their kids go on vacation to this chalet in the Swiss Alps. And they're all sitting outside. And I went with a friend of mine who is on the autism spectrum. Okay. And he knows it. And, we talk about it and so on. We went to see this movie and we got into an argument after the movie. And there have been different times in my friendship with him where I've thought, is he is really narcissistic? What's going on? But I've since realized, no, he's not. He may have some traits just like I do or anybody does, but he is definitely not, personality disorder. But anyway, we went to see this movie and the couple, along with a bunch of people, are sitting outside and all the time at this place, because of where it's located, there are avalanches, but they, it's at a safe distance. But this one particular day, this massive avalanche came towards the hotel. No one was injured, but it looked like that's it. And the husband got up and left the kids, left the wife, and didn't think about anybody, like jumped on people to, that his first instinct was to just run. And it changed the whole dynamic of their marriage. Because, of course, the wife stayed and protected the children. Even though she couldn't have protected them. But, again, nothing happened, but you sort of watch this play out through this movie, how that just rocked their world. And I thought it was interesting because my friend was totally defending the guy. And I wasn't really defending either, but I was like, that would rock me to my core. But it was interesting to have that discussion and to have my friend tell me, from his perspective, I bet you he was on the spectrum. And of course he would just run and da 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 da. So that was interesting to me. What do you think about that, Stephanie?
Well, if I'll see in the movie, I'm afraid to make a comment. I might want to be wise in that. But I think if what you're kind of getting to is not reading the whole situation or the context of the situation, if
Yes,
that's part of the movie, that might be that context, or mind blindness is the
exactly.
opposite of high theory of mind. Because there have been some situations where wives that I've worked with have had traumas from. I had someone who got left in Spain by their husband without a way home and clothes. I had someone who was left at a hospital during delivery or after delivery, someone who, had their spouse Uber themselves for a surgical procedure. So there was,
Right,
because of a need for routine or not seeing the importance of the situation.
right,
It was not out of maliciousness. It wasn't mean spirited. It was really, I don't see why I need to be there, or I don't see why this
right.
is such a big deal. And that's then, of course, traumatic for the other person, right? If you're the one left in a foreign country, or
Absolutely.
you're the one left without a ride home, and you're having a heart attack, well, just get an Uber. I don't want to waste money on the 911 call. So let's get an Uber. It's cheaper.
Exactly.
That's that more rigid thinking and not malicious intent, where I might be a narcissist in that situation would enjoy and relish in that, right? The pain, what
Exactly.
I'm doing to you, how you feel. I want you to feel helpless and vulnerable. That's the total different of the mindset of those two situations, I think.
I always think it's intention. Anyone that I've been around that has a diagnosed personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, there's always been a forethought of maliciousness and a glee in the pain that their actions have caused other people. And anyone that I've been with who is on the spectrum that has done something that was insensitive, when I said, okay, listen, that was really insensitive. I gave you a gift and you never even said thank you or never even acknowledged that I gave this to you. And then you didn't show up for something because it didn't work on your timetable or whatever. And they expressed dismay and even thought, oh, okay, I guess I could see how that would be taken that way. There was no malicious intent in trying to make me feel horrible. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
yeah. And even one thing that Jody Carlton says, when she asks her clientele, when she's doing her assessment or she's talking to the spouse, do you feel your spouse is trying to control you, or do you feel your spouse is trying to control the environment and you happen to be in that environment? So it
Right.
feels like control. And that's
Exactly.
a very important distinguishing factor, because the narcissist, during that dating phase and they love bomb, or in the friendship phase, if you're friends with the narcissist, they make you feel special and they kind of get to know your weaknesses, and they kind of give you the things, get you rely on them, trust me,
Yeah.
depend on me. And then it's like, boom, it's a zinger. When you need me most, I'm not there. And, now I'm going to exploit your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities and, kind of make you question yourself, but also let you know you can't do this without me. And that's that crazy making stuff that happens in a relationship, with the narcissist. With the person on the spectrum, especially since most of my clients come to me undiagnosed and they're 40, 50, 60, 70. I even had an 80-year-old. They didn't know. And so maybe some of that defensiveness at first is, there's still a stigma about
Right.
autism in the population. And so not wanting to be kind of labeled or diagnosed or identified in that way. So it's a little bit, I find it's about 50-50. I find for some people, it's like, wow, that explains everything. That makes
Mhm.
sense. And, kind of let me work with that. And, what are the things I can work on and do? And then for some, it's like an anger or defensive thing. And so that might look a little more narcissistic because of the defense mechanisms of maybe some denial that this, fits me. And then sometimes, like I said, there is this crossover that the person is both. And so, sometimes when I'm working with a couple, and there's usually a team of us involved, sometimes he has a therapist, she has a therapist, I'm the marriage
Right.
person, there's sometimes a team. And if you have the opportunity to talk with, other therapists and other members who are kind of colleagues in the situation, it's like, sometimes I think autism, sometimes I think narcissism, sometimes I think autism. And so you go, you know what? It could be both, because that was very autistic, and that was very narcissistic. So I want to still paint the picture that I don't think it's that common.
Right.
And I'm not going to name this person out loud, but there was a Psychology Today article that I highly disagree with. And it says they think narcissism is going to become part of the autism spectrum.
Oh
And
my.
I think, no, I
mean,
don't think that at
is
all.
ridiculous.
Totally.
That is ridiculous. Just my non-professional opinion.
Because intention, motivation
Yes.
matter so much. It's not just about some of the crossover, because usually this is what a spouse will tell me. They're like, why is my husband being so selfish? Or why is my husband not paying attention to me? Why is my husband disengaged? That's usually what the Google is. And, because they're a narcissist is self-centered, and autism is about self-referencing. Both sometimes have poor self-awareness. Both may not always appreciate how to be empathetic and to show compassionate care at the right time. Both might have defensive reactions to things that are personal or kind of being called out. And it's interesting, one of the things, treating people as objects or preferring objects over people. Again, the narcissist wants you to know you're owned or an object. I pull you off the shelf when I want to, and I put you back on the shelf, and I put you in your place. The person on the spectrum, because of interest and passions and preferred time alone, it might be more that than trying to objectify their spouse on purpose, but the spouse might feel objectified, and that's important for her reality. And it's important, but like you said, usually a person willing to do their work when they're on the autism spectrum, when they hear that, it's like discomfort. That's not okay. And how do I do that? I love my wife. I want to be married, so how do we work in that space? That's not what a narcissist would do. Narcissists deflect and throw up red herrings and push back. And it's always about the other person. I wouldn't have done that if she wouldn't have done this. And again, just that, when the loss of sanity, sometimes that's that big indicator.
Yeah, I've never been love bombed by a person on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, but boy, have I been love bombed by some crafty narcissists.
Well, it's a little bit different, because that's so the love bomb, again, the motivation of the narcissist is, to get you kind of, addicted to me, into me.
Yep.
And sometimes the person on the spectrum goes about it like a restricted special interest, kind of collecting facts about the person. Like I like purple. So, you'd want to know that I like purple, or I like this kind of flowers, but it's more like a case study than a love bomb. But usually they're pretty good boyfriends. I mean, some of my people will say, like, the dating phase was one of our better phases while he was still trying to get information about me.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because there have been many a show I've done with, psychiatrists, psychologists, neurologists, talking about counselors, talking about, that you feel like you are under glass when you're dating someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, because they are mining you for information. They're gathering it, though. Again, it's the intention. Someone on the autism spectrum might be mining for information about you, but their intention is not typically to use that to hurt you down the road.
Right.
So the intention is where it's different. I mean, everybody, whether, a neurotypical person can, go on a date with people and try to get information about them because they want to, show interest in this person. So, doing that isn't just a trait that's on the autism spectrum or only with narcissistic personality disorder. It's the intention. that decides which way does this go?
And I think why it might be difficult. I was again at a conference and I was thinking about, the person was talking about how people I'm in my 40s. And those of us trained on the DSM-4, which would be, anybody who was in school before 2015, we would have been trained on the DSM-4. One of the things that talks about when you're giving a diagnosis is called the GAF, which is like a global functioning score. And we don't use that anymore in the DSM-5, but for the DSM-4, if somebody was a certain number over, like they weren't functioning at home and work and all of these spaces, then they were more likely to, get some kind of diagnostic code. But if we're still functioning pretty high, and so maybe it was just an issue at home or marriage or just at work, but not at home, there was a whole thing in the back, like adjustment disorders or temporary, situational things that you could code. And I think that's why so many adults on the spectrum are not getting diagnosed and possibly misdiagnosed as narcissistic. But I just like to remind clinicians, like, look, people grow in compensatory strategies, from
Right.
childhood to now, may have learned some eye contact, may have been told enough times by teachers or nuns or parents, look me in the eye, that they can, kind of fake or have a skill in compensatory skills. A lot of adults end up masking a lot, they've kind
Absolutely.
of figured out. So if you're not sure who you're kind of working with, and so you have a person who's this high functioning individual at work, because most of my people have great jobs and they're captains in the industry and great niches. And it's like the only problem seems to be the marriage and family and kind of social interactions. You might be misled to think that is narcissism because the person is functioning so well in the other arena, versus, is it possible that person's masking in front of you? Is it possible there's compensatory skills and strategies? So if you're really not familiar with adults on the spectrum and you're going to do assessments, do some, there's lots of YouTubes out there just to kind of see different people's styles of how autism represents in the adult population, and kind of get your mind out of what it looks like for a child or a teenager. Because I think it's in the adult population that we're seeing mistakes made on what
Right.
might be the true diagnosis or identification.
And then let's talk about when there is a case for both.
Oh man, I'm starting to refer those.
And like so many therapists, I mean, yeah, it's there. I always say this, and I know many people who have been through painful happenings in their life, where let's say they're in deep grief and they are behaving in ways that are, so hard to love, but that doesn't, I call that situational narcissism. Sometimes you have something happen and, for that time period, you just got to be loved through it by the people that really love you and know you, because you will come out of that and sort of ground yourself back into who you are, which is not this person so heightened on myself. There's that. But then there are also people that are just, they have a personality disorder, end of story, that's it. And they can also, be autistic.
Yeah. And I now, I'm a counselor and a coach, and I have my own coach. And so I'm just going to say, now I know when I'm feeling that hook, when I'm feeling like this kind of internal frustration that I can't describe, I'm like, this could possibly be that. And I need to examine that. And I
Right.
now know that is not the best combination for me. And so
Right.
I will usually refer to my colleague, Jody Carlton, and say, I'm going to let you work with Jody, because that is a kind of a specialty niche for her. And for me, it still hooks me some. And you can't work in a situation where you're feeling hooked, yourself.
Right. I know. Yeah. And what's interesting in the world being, I looked at the pandemic a lot like that resort where the avalanche is coming down, and how do people behave? How does someone behave in a crisis? What is their go-to? And for some people, the go-to was, I'm going to picket at stores and I'm going to scream at people for wearing a mask or for not wearing a mask. I'm going to, absolutely heightened, what you would say, deplorable behavior. And then other people went a complete opposite direction. So it was really interesting to watch that going on, but it does not surprise me at all that we've seen a 25% increase in diagnoses around narcissism after and during the pandemic. So I find that interesting, but I kind of look at it, and I'm not correlating the two, but once autism, I mean, boy, advocates like you did your job putting information about autism, getting the correct diagnosis, being aware, making the public aware. And then all of a sudden, in quotes, well, now just everybody's getting diagnosed, blah, blah, blah. No, we're actually paying attention. I feel like that with narcissism, with what's happened. And again, I am not correlating those two things together. I'm just saying awareness, public awareness. Of course, more people are getting diagnosed with this. It's not that it didn't exist before. It's just people are noticing now. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So with the autism specifically, I know I've referenced many times on my podcast, the 2019 JAMA study of 2.1 million people, which is ginormous study over 5 countries and longitudinal, one of the strongest studies. And it suggests there's an 80% hereditary factor with autism. And so, of course, we're going to see more if children are 1 in 50 something now. We can kind of extrapolate that to the adult population. But what I saw happen in the pandemic, especially in the lockdown days, when people are locked in the house and people are out of their routine and function, I think it definitely exacerbated that for people on the spectrum. And then so it became a little more obvious because there was a routine, there was a something that was happening, and now that was cut off. And then I think maybe for other personality disorders or other things, when you're in it's not that COVID or being locked up caused it, but there were so many stressors and so many things going on. It revealed what was there. It was like some things could no longer be hidden because it was in your face every day.
Exactly. I remember going out with a friend. We all were wearing masks and getting her daughter to wear a mask. Her daughter's on the spectrum. She was 4, and it was just, we had to plan, and we always had to plan. Like, did somebody get a nap? Did they eat? All these things that every autistic parent knows, it's not just about going to the store. Like, there's a whole thing.
Right.
And so we're getting ready to go out because, we hadn't been out, and everybody's protected, blah, 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 all these things. But man, for someone who has a sensory processing disorder to wear a mask, I mean, Stephanie,
right.
So difficult. And someone at a store, because her daughter kept pulling it down because it was bothering her. It was bothering me, but I could just ignore it. Her daughter could not. And what child anyway, whether they're on the spectrum or not. But this woman's just started screaming.
Yeah.
This other woman started screaming about, the daughter pulling the mask down. And I thought, man, the world just became infinitely more difficult for everyone, whether you're on the spectrum or not, And
it was hard for some of the individuals I worked with once they were working from home for 2 years to now go back into their work environment. And a couple of people said, Stephanie, I didn't realize how stressed I was at work, dealing with all the sensory stuff until I was at home and could kind of control my sensory input and output. And then going back into that environment, now I really notice the lights or really notice the office buzz of people talking. And I signed a couple of letters, asking, for permission for the person to remain working from home. And then a second thing that was really frustrating to me was the mask mandate, that it was so specific that it had to be, the mask around your ears, because I had individuals that elastic around the ears is the problem. And so they're a thing like gaiters. I mean, they weren't like trying to make a political statement about not wearing a mask. Like, can we wear a gaiter or something else? Can we wear the
Right.
shield? Because I don't have a problem with it touching my head. Can I wear a gaiter? Because it's softer and I don't feel it around my ears. And for those who are like, no, everybody has to wear this, even when the person had, a diagnosis or identification of autism, it's like, can we make this accommodation? You're concerned about the public health. That's great. This person has a sensory issue. Can we meet somewhere in the middle? And I found the companies were so rigid. They were more rigid. Like, no, everybody has to wear this kind of mask. And I was
Right.
like, but okay, so you can wear it around your ears and it can be the surgical mask or it can be a cloth mask. You don't have a problem if it's cloth or the paper, but you don't want the gaiter because the gaiter's cloth.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to me. Just
I think
does
that's,
not make sense to me.
I know. There's so many. I think I don't know how we all got through. And we're still. I mean, I know I have felt. I finally just got decent internet at my house. I've spent a year and a half of the pandemic with horrifying internet because I'm helping out a family member going through a horrible time. And I even find myself when I have a really packed day on the computer going, oh my gosh, I have so much anxiety. Is this anxiety because of everything that's gone on? Or is this how much anxiety I was able to push down prior
Right.
to this? You know?
It taxed your reserves. I mean, that too, under the 2 years of the pandemic, my husband and I had 3 trees fall. I mean, essentially at one point in time, all of our property was damaged. Our 2 vehicles, our home
Oh,
was in disrepair. We moved 8 times
oh my
during the
gosh. During,
pandemic. And
oh my gosh.
you run out of your reserves at some point in
Yes.
time, right?
Yes.
It's like, are you kidding me? Is this really
Right.
happening? And kind of, even if you've been really strong for a long time, we just weren't made, even what they call combat fatigue, for deployed individuals. There's a reason of 6 to 9 months. It's to have that time of rest. And so
Right.
in the civilian population, we might have adrenal fatigue, which is the same thing. We're just not in combat. But, after so much stress, after so much stress, after so much stress, without, replenishing, you can get adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue because your high cortisol levels have bottomed you out. Your normal daily stressors, you've been handling those, but if it's been chronic and it's been growing in more difficulty and it's unrelenting, there's going to be that too. And so add that into our discussion. That's the neurotypical population is going to struggle in that way. Now, if there's already a challenge there
Right.
for routines and stressors and sensory stuff, that really created an issue in my population.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. My friends on the spectrum, we all talk about those kinds of stressors and what it's been like and how difficult it's been. And then I've watched people in my life. Thankfully, I didn't have any directly trying to do anything to me, but they were doing it to someone I love, someone with a narcissistic personality disorder. And to watch this time and just be in glee about it because how stressed everyone is. Well, now is a really good time to have, a playground for a narcissist to just wreak havoc and enjoy themselves because, because boy, do they love to, I always look at it like, who the narcissist is because the person that is standing on the burning house with a flamethrower pointing and shouting at everybody else being the problem, the person that's standing there on the burning house with the flamethrower, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, when you are, as we wrap this up, you've now that that yes, those two things can exist and you have someone to refer to, what would you say, to parents or to someone in a marriage that, just doesn't know, or what could I do to sort of lessen the amount of what might turn into some narcissistic traits later? What are some things that you could say to, to people that might be dealing with this, or participating in creating it even unknowingly?
That first of all, while Google and WebMD are great to get you started on your resource, this is definitely a space to get a professional involved.
Yeah.
For me, an organization that I highly recommend is AANE. And they are an organization who focus on autism, Asperger's. They're up in the New England area. I think that stands for Autism, Asperger's, New England. But they have people they have vetted. They have a diagnostician or clinician resource there. So if you really think it's adult autism, you can go there, and there is many people who are there, maybe in your state, who are adequate and prepared and understand the difference in adult autism. The narcissist piece, there's definitely a lot more trauma, in the relationship. And, I say to clinicians, sometimes you think the wife is the cuckoo one because she's very volatile and very emotional, and she's now sitting in your office finally with the space to share, and he's sitting there kind of calm, cool, and collected. And your tendency might be to be, well, here's the problem, she's like borderline or bipolar or something.
Right.
But you've got to understand, those dynamics. And so now when I do have someone that I suspect could be both, Jody Carlton at Spectrum Relationships, she's kind of my go-to for that, because I am kind of stronger with a narcissist, or if I suspect the narcissistic traits, or maybe they're chauvinistic or misogynistic or something in there, I'm going to take a much stronger stance. Whereas it's super important with autism to create safety and understanding, and
Right.
kind of who you are, and kind of a joyful presence and atmosphere. That's kind of what I want to be, create that safe space. But I'm gonna see that as different. And then when I start to think that, I might say, okay, I've been using this technique, or we've been using this communication issue, and it's sticking for this reason. It kind of seems like this could be it. That's usually when I'm going to refer out. So I say to people who are specialists in personality disorders, really bone up some on your autism skills. And if you're an autism specialist,
There you go.
like me, bone up on your
Exactly.
personality disorder. And that's kind of the approach I took. I've been taking more classes on personality disorders, more continuing education on personality, because I feel like I've got the autism thing locked down. But I want to continue my own understanding and differential even though the only thing I assess right now is autism. I don't even assess for personality disorders, but I used to, right? I was an LPC. So I kind of know it and sense it, but I don't even make that official diagnosis. I would prefer someone else, do that, especially if I've already been a part, of the autism assessment, because it could be another layer that is more important, because narcissism can be treated if the person is willing.
Yes.
And so let's
Absolutely.
deal with the things that can be treated first, and then let's talk about strategies and modifications and relationship issues. If it's simply I say simply like that simple, if it's a neurodiversity and not with more complexities, how about that? Because every
There you
wife
go.
heard me said just neurodiversity. I'm sorry, I take that back. I take it back.
Well, then lastly, what would you, if you have a family that you're working with, or and you see some things that they're doing unknowingly or knowingly with their kids that are on the spectrum that can, be a problem later, in the area of narcissism, what do you, what do you say? What do you do with that when you're noticing that?
Yeah, so I think, some things are the same, whether a child's neurotypical or
Right. Absolutely.
neurodivergent. There's a lot, especially in American and Western culture, we compliment achievement, and we compliment, the task. instead of character. And
Right.
so it's more relational and actually more connecting to say, you were really kind to your siblings today. I saw that. I really appreciate how you took turns, on the playground, or, your teacher said that you're very respectful in class. Too much of like, you've got to get an A and you've got to go to Harvard. And those are important things, right? I'm not saying you just, take off any kind of hope for achievement. But I think
Right.
when we overpress, you need to be the quarterback, you need to be the cheerleading captain, you need to be the model, you need to be the president of the organization, you need to be in, DECA, you need to be AP, and pushing
Right.
all
The
of
brainiac.
that. That your identity is all the things that you've achieved, or your identity is your intellect. We could do better as parents and society to encourage character and relational development more than push so much on individual achievement.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Stephanie Holmes and Reverend Stephanie Holmes, can you please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you?
All right. So while my practice is full, more about my practice and services that we do, that would be holmesasr.com. That's Autism Spectrum Resources for Marriage and Family. So I currently cannot take anyone else into my caseload, but if you are able to get to Georgia, I do autism assessments. Our other organization is Christian Neurodiverse Marriage, and that's where you can access our podcast, Neurodiverse Christian Couples, which is brought to you through Mental Health News Radio platform.
And we're so happy to have it. We've worked together for years now, but I'm so appreciative of everything that you do. And you're, very tempered fairness in how you deal with things. So I appreciate that too, Stephanie.
Well, thank you for what you do. Even getting into podcasting, you're the one that encouraged me, Kristen. So look at you.
I'm trying to get the voices out there, let me tell you. All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie, for coming on. And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode, and we will catch you next time.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristen Sananta Walker, and thank you for listening.
Me tonight, and I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.